Howdy folks, and welcome back to Armoured Warfare with a mighty Jingles. Today we're going to be taking a look at one of the PvE cooperative missions available in Armoured Warfare that seems to give people more problems than any other, and that of course is Operation Ghost Hunter. In Operation Ghost Hunter, your team have to work together to secure various different defensive points against waves of attacking AI tanks. If the enemy AI manage to capture any one of these defensive points, the mission is lost. Now, this is not unique. There are plenty of other missions in Armoured Warfare's co-op mode which employ this rolling capture mechanic. Believe it or not, this game mode does actually make things very simple for the player. You don't have to go looking for and finding enemy tanks. Instead, all you have to do is pay attention to the map, make sure that you're covering whichever defensive objective needs defending at the time, and the enemy tanks will come to you in their attempts to capture that defensive location. Despite that, it is of course entirely possible to fail the mission, and not just on Ghost Hunter, on any of the maps that employ this rolling capture base mechanic. And not just because your team is bad. When Armoured Warfare was brand new, nobody had ever seen this kind of game mechanic before. Certainly not in an armoured combat game, maybe in a first-person shooter, but not driving around in tanks, tank destroyers and armoured personnel carriers. People weren't paying attention to the map. Instead, they were driving off in all directions, trying to find enemy tanks to kill, and getting caught hopelessly and horribly out of position, which would inevitably lead to the one or two players who, by accident or design, were in the correct location, getting themselves completely ruffle-stomped by the massed horde of enemy armour. It didn't take long, of course, for most people to figure out what they should be doing. At first, the problem lay with people just not understanding what the game mechanic required of them, or they just weren't paying attention to the map. Or they were paying attention to the map, but they hadn't been playing long enough to understand what the various different map icons meant, and therefore didn't know where they were supposed to be and when. And then of course, well, some people are just hopelessly bad and they're never going to get it regardless of how many times they fail at it. However, in general, it didn't take too long once the player base had matured slightly to understand what it was that was required of them in these kind of rolling objective capture maps, and the trick to winning was learned through experience. As the players understood exactly where the enemy tanks were going to spawn from, they soon figured out the best locations to position themselves in order to put the maximum amount of firepower down onto the enemy tanks while minimising the potential amount of damage that was going to come back to them. And this works very well once you have the relevant experience on all of the other rolling capture maps. And yet people still fail Operation Ghost Hunter with monotonous regularity. Why is that? Well, there are a couple of reasons for it, and it's not just because people suck. You see, the thing that makes Ghost Hunter different from the other rolling capture maps is that the actual precise spawn locations of every single wave of enemy vehicles is not generally known by the player base. And it's not known on Ghost Hunter because in the overwhelming majority of cases, the first time anybody on your team gets the first hint that the final two waves of enemy vehicles have spawned is when they are already occupying the town centre over there on the far side of the map, and by then it's almost too late to do anything about it. Well, almost, but not quite. What usually happens at this point is the faster vehicles on your team, if they have any sense and they're paying any kind of attention, will immediately break off from whatever they were dealing with to rush into the town centre and attempt to reset the cap. Unfortunately, the kind of machines that can make it there in time are definitely not suited to fighting in tight city streets against enemy main battle tanks. And so what usually happens on Ghost Hunter is your wheeled tank destroyers, for example, and your armoured fighting vehicles rush into the town, attempt to reset the cap, get overwhelmed by the massive enemy armour clustering around the town centre, die, leaving the one or two main battle tanks in your team to lumber into the town centre after them and meet the same inevitable fate. And the mission is failed. And everybody complains that Ghost Hunter is imbalanced, that the last two waves of enemies spawn too soon, that they spawn too close to the town centre, that nobody has a chance to get in there and do anything about it. This is quite simply not the case. The tactics that work so well on every other rolling capture map in Armoured Warfare's PvE mode work exactly as well here on Ghost Hunter. The problem is that on Ghost Hunter, nobody knows where those two last waves of enemy vehicles spawn from, so they're never in a position to catch them as they spawn when they're at their most vulnerable, in the same way as every other spawn of enemy vehicles on all of these maps. And the reason nobody knows where those tanks spawn from is because most of the time your team is still squabbling over the last couple of kills of the one or two surviving tanks of the preceding waves, while this wave of tanks is already on their way into the town centre, completely unspotted, because there's nobody over here to spot them. And so you end up in a best case scenario with something like exactly what's happening now. Frantically driving around tight city streets in machines that have absolutely no business driving around tight city streets, with main battle tanks and tank destroyers lurking in wait around every corner. This is a practically unarmoured wheeled tank destroyer. I'm supposed to be sitting at the back of the map taking people's turrets off from long range with one hand while I drink a Coke with the other. I'm not supposed to be taking this thing into urban combat, getting involved in knife fights with other tank destroyers and main battle tanks. There's got to be an easier way of doing this. Now, this is certainly exciting. In fact, it's one of the most exciting PvE games of armoured warfare I've ever played. I survived by the barest skin of my teeth. There's only 2 of us left alive at this point. We just need to stay alive long enough to run the clock down. And exciting though it is, you can't help but get the feeling that somehow you're doing it wrong. Surely there's a better way to be doing this. Surely I could be playing the tank destroyer as a tank destroyer. Surely our armoured fighting vehicles can be spotting instead of getting involved in knife fights with main battle tanks. Well, there is actually a better way of doing it, and I'm going to show you how. And as with most things that seem difficult when you don't know how to do it, it's actually really, really simple and straightforward. It's not complicated at all. In fact, the trick to succeeding at Operation Ghost Hunter is exactly the same trick that enables you to succeed at every other rolling capture map in Armoured Warfare. You simply have to spot the enemy vehicles as they spawn and put your machines in a position where they can maximise their firepower on them while they're at their most vulnerable. The same as in every other spawn of every other enemy vehicle on every other map that uses this mechanic. The trick is knowing where they spawn from and getting there in time. This time around I'm in an almost 100% stock, I think this was only the second game I've ever played in it, BMD-1, Soviet Tier 4 armoured fighting vehicle. Right at the start we know exactly where the initial way the tanks are going to spawn from, so we do what people do in this game mode. We move up to cover them as they appear. The BMD-1 has a 73mm gun and it doesn't fire any kind of armour-piercing ammunition at all. You start off with high explosive and high explosive anti-tank ammunition, as well as obviously shaped charged warheads fired from the anti-tank guided missile launcher on top of that tiny turret. I have managed to upgrade the high explosive anti-tank ammunition to high explosive anti-tank fin stabilised. The only difference there is the fin stabilised high explosive anti-tank ammo travels at a faster velocity than the regular heat. I have not yet unlocked the high explosive frag ammunition. The potential problem with the BMD-1 is because it's a Tier 4 vehicle, you can encounter the kind of machines that either have composite armour or explosive reactive armour plating, exactly the kind of armour which were designed to defeat these shaped charge high explosive anti-tank shells. The chieftain over there, well, he's in trouble because 1, he can't see me, and 2, while he does have very thick armour, it's all rolled steel plating. And high explosive anti-tank ammunition goes right through rolled steel plate, especially when you slam one right into the lower glacis, or as the British Army tankers call them, the toe plate. So, we've dealt with the tanks spawning from this side. At this point on Ghost Hunter there's usually a couple of enemy tanks appearing from the far side of the bridge, and we're already in position to intercept them. So far it's progressing just like any other rolling capture map. These guys have seen me, but I don't really need to worry. They're shooting at another friendly vehicle who's closer to them, and so he's the priority target for them. So a couple of rounds of high explosive anti-tank into these tanks that do not have any kind of composite armour or explosive reactive plating, and well, we've dealt with them. And I'll just quickly nuke one of those SATCOM trucks, pick up one of the secondary objectives. The next major spawn of enemy vehicles is going to come, although they're not quite ready yet because the guys on the other side of the bridge haven't finished spawning yet. There they are. But the next major wave of enemy vehicles on Ghost Hunter is going to spawn from the, well, that location down there on the opposite side of the missile silos. And you can see I keep looking around waiting for them to pop up. And while everybody's engaged with the vehicles behind me, still crossing over the bridge, I'm going to rush down here and try to get some early spots on them, there they go, as they break cover and come underneath the motorway bridge. Right now the second capture point is active, and it's the missile silos themselves over there to my right. And if ever you're playing one of these maps and you don't know exactly where it is you're supposed to be going or what you're supposed to be doing, just look at the mini-map. There's a cross with a circle around it which indicates the objective for the enemy tanks. And oh, that was unfortunate. Doubly unfortunate. Yeah, that guy just put a shot right through the road barrier and into me, and my ATGM missed. So, okay, I've done better. But once again, as with the first spawn of enemy vehicles, looking at the map, everybody is already in position to light these guys up before they can make any kind of progress onto the capture point. Well, almost everybody. One of our T-64 Tier 4 main battle tanks, for whatever reason, is AFK. You can see him on the map. He's still over on the other side of the bridge by the first spawn of enemy vehicles. And we only have 2 Tier 4 main battle tanks in this game. We do have another main battle tank, but it's an Object 155 and he's only Tier 3. So before the really, really dangerous spawn of enemy vehicles has even appeared on the map, we're already 1 tank down. But by a stroke of luck, the position that that T-64 has gone AFK in is going to be the key to understanding exactly where the final spawns of enemy vehicles appear on this map. He couldn't have picked a better place to go AFK. Now pay attention to the defend the missile silo timer up there in the top right corner of the screen. Watch what happens when that timer reaches 1 minute remaining to defend this location, not the town centre, but the missile silo here. The town centre is going to be the next location that we have to defend. I'm not having much luck with these missiles, am I? I would have been far better off sticking to the 73mm gun. I nearly said 75. Sorry, force of habit. So I switched to the 73mm high explosive anti-tank and I miss anyway. I'm so bad. Okay, one final tank left to kill. T-64 nails him. Now, I know it's going to take forever for that T-64 to get from here to the town centre. I can be there very, very quickly. So this is what I'm doing right now, because I'm anticipating that town centre being swarming. We're just going to stop to take a shot at this M109 artillery that the AFK T-64 is very, very handily spotting for us. An M551 Sheridan's just popped up as well. And I'm desperately trying to get into that town centre because I know it's going to be swarming with enemy tanks very, very soon. I'm just going to have to deal with this fella first, however. Now, while we're shooting this guy up, who's delaying me from getting to where I think I need to be, pay attention to the timer. Watch what happens when it reaches 1 minute, and pay attention to the map and what suddenly pops up on the map right next to the AFK T-64. Look at that lot. That's a full spawn of enemy vehicles, who, if not for that T-64 being there, would not have been detected and would be on the way to the town centre right now. That's where they spawn from. If not for that AFK T-64, right now I would still be on my way to the town centre, sitting waiting for this lot to come to me, and fighting them in the worst possible circumstances, because the T-64 went AFK in the exact right position. He spotted all of these guys for us. But what's important here, while I'm pumping an ATGM into this Sheridan after lighting him up so the ATGM is going to do maximum damage, what's important here is look at the timer. We're still in the defend the silo phase, and 1 minute before that phase ended, 1 minute before the map is telling us we should be defending the town, vehicles already spawning to head into the town. And that's why, as happens so often on the Ghost Hunter map, while you're still dealing with the tanks that are threatening the silo, the second the counter ticks over and you have to move on to the next defensive point in the town, you're already being capped, and there's anything up to 6 enemy tanks already sitting in the town centre. So it turns out that the trick to dealing with Operation Ghost Hunter successfully is exactly the same as dealing with every other map that uses this kind of rolling capture mechanic. Be in the right location to catch these guys as they spawn and take them apart with ease, rather than having to deal with them at point blank range in town streets, in machines that are just not designed to fight in that kind of environment. The only thing that made Ghost Hunter different, and by the way, this is not where they all spawn from. I've had games on Ghost Hunter where I've been in this position waiting for the enemy tanks to spawn, and only a couple have appeared from here. There are other spawn locations. They don't always spawn from exactly the same locations in every time you play this map. But they do all spawn from locations that are impossible to see if everybody in your team is still down by the missile silos defending against the second wave of enemy tanks. And that's why so often when you're playing Ghost Hunter, these tanks right here are already in the town centre behind me, while we're still dealing with the tanks that are threatening the missile silo. But Ghost Hunter has a couple of other surprises, because there are actually 3 spawns of enemy tanks that happen in the final phase of the battle here, and you can see the third and final spawn has appeared on the northern side of the town. Now, they are staggered, they're not all going to appear at the same time, but you can see how critically important it is that you do have your machines in the right place at the right time, ready to pick them off, rather than having to deal with all 3 spawns of enemy tanks in the capture circle at the same time. One word of caution, however, because Obsidian have been quite sneaky about this. Hang on a second, while I just drive for my life. You can see where those guys spawn from as well. Oh, we'll just make it out of there intact. Obsidian have been quite sneaky about this. These final waves of enemy machines are not all going to spawn from exactly the same place at exactly the same time. I've had games since this match where I've been sitting on that ridge overlooking the river to the west of the town, waiting for multiple waves of enemy vehicles to spawn. And only one wave has spawned from that direction, and the other 2 spawns have come from the northern end of the town. So it doesn't pay to get too complacent when you're playing this map. It is definitely one of the more difficult, if not the most difficult, of the rolling capture maps available in the game. But it's definitely not unbeatable. The trick, as with all of the other rolling capture maps in the game, is knowing where these tanks are going to spawn from and having people in position to cover them so you can pick them apart at your leisure in the open, where it's easy instead of having to fight them all at the same time in these tight village streets. If you can do that, Ghost Hunter is easily, for me, the most enjoyable of these rolling capture maps to play. And we did this with 4 tanks. I mean, and it did get quite tense at one moment, because we still didn't quite nail down the exact spawn point of that final wave of enemy vehicles that I ended up dogfighting in the streets of the town there. They appear from somewhere up on the northern end of the map. Or at least they did this time. There seem to be 3 different spawn locations for the final waves of enemy vehicles, and 2 of them are behind me on the other side of the river, and there's 1 of them up on the northern end of the town, and we haven't yet had eyes on of those vehicles as they spawn. But it's not that important that you do. By the way, right now we're looking for that last M551 Sheridan, who the T64, our little AFK friend, the hero of the match, spotted quite some time ago. And whoa, careful there, Sunshine. XM800 just cut me up there, right in front of me. And there's the Sheridan. And bingo, that's my final kill of the game. But as I was saying, so far I've managed to narrow down 2 of the potential 3 different spawn locations for the final waves of enemy vehicles. I'm fairly sure, judging by the location that the last spotted bunch of enemies were coming from, that it's somewhere to the north of the town. And I have played other games where I found a couple of stragglers once we've dealt with the main enemy force in that kind of location, but I've never yet actually seen them spawning and been able to catch them in the open as they were just entering the map. They're around there somewhere, but it's not that important that you get all of them while they're in the open after having freshly appeared. What is important is that you don't deal with all of them when they're in the town centre, when there's just a massive enemy armour and it's far too late to do anything about it. You're never going to reset them all in time. But as long as you can get the majority of the enemy tanks, 2 out of the 3 waves that spawn, before they make it into the town, then dealing with the final wave is not too difficult, even if we're not completely sure exactly where they spawn from just yet. But it's only a matter of time before somebody finds them and posts a video up on YouTube of it happening. And that is my best ever result in a game of Operation Ghost Hunter in Armoured Warfare. And it was all down to the hero of the match, who was AFK for most of the match. that T64 who went AFK over the bridge from the initial spawn point of enemy vehicles in the map. If not for him going AFK in that position, we would never have seen these guys in time and been in a position to deal with them before they became an insurmountable threat, which is what happens most of the time that people end up playing Operation Ghost Hunter. In the very, very best case scenario, 1 or 2 of the faster machines manage to get into that town centre and delay the cap long enough for the rest of the team to catch up and maybe be able to pull off a win. But because nobody knows exactly where those tanks spawn from, nobody was ever in a position to intercept them before the situation got to that stage. Well, knowledge is power. So hopefully, with the knowledge learned from this video, Operation Ghost Hunter is no longer going to be the single most frustrating map to find yourself on in the PVE rotation in Armoured Warfare. Or then again, maybe it's going to be even more frustrating, because while you now know what to do in order to win at this map, there's no guarantee that the rest of your team will, and even less guarantee that they're going to listen to you when you try to tell them. But hey, what can I say? You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. That's it for today, folks. Hope you enjoyed today's video, and as always, take care, and I'll catch you next time.